What if I told you that the Daytona 500 isn't just NASCAR's biggest race, it might even be the single most American sporting event we have? Because this isn't a race where the best driver always wins. It's a race where the best teams still have to panic, where legends get humbled and underdogs can become immortal. But here's the problem. Over the last few years, you've probably heard people say the same thing over and over. The Daytona 500 just isn't what it used to be. So today we're going to answer two questions. How did the Daytona 500 become the great American race? And is it still the pinnacle of American motorsports, or is it slowly turning into just another race? Every motorsport has a crown jewel race that carries extra weight. In Formula One, it's Monaco. It's glamorous, historic, and built on tradition. In endurance racing, it's Le Mans. Survival and excellence over a full 24 hours. And in open wheel, America has the Indy 500, a race that almost feels like a national holiday. And NASCAR has Daytona. And if we're being honest, the Daytona 500 isn't just NASCAR's biggest race, it's NASCAR's identity. Daytona is where NASCAR tries to show the world, this is what we are, this is what we believe the sport should be, and this is what a champion should be able to survive. But Daytona isn't always the biggest thing in motorsports. It became that because of timing, television, American culture, and a long list of moments that almost feel like they were scripted. To understand Daytona, you have to understand Bill France Sr., because NASCAR didn't come up through fancy European circuits, aristocratic prestige. NASCAR was born on dirt tracks with local heroes, a moonshine culture, and hard-nosed American working-class men racing. And Bill France Sr. wasn't just running races, he was building a product. He knew NASCAR needed a cathedral, a place that looked like it belonged on the biggest stage. So he built Daytona International Speedway, and honestly, it was outrageous for its time. A massive superspeedway for stock cars with banking that made it look like the track was trying to throw cars into the sky. That wasn't normal at the time. That was visionary and maybe a little insane. In 1959, NASCAR hosted the first Daytona 500. And because it's Daytona, the first race immediately becomes a myth. The finish was so close, officials couldn't even declare a winner right away. They had to review it, and it took multiple days to confirm. That kind of controversy normally would have been a nightmare, but it helped turn Daytona into a legend. And that's the first key to Daytona's reputation. NASCAR at Daytona produces stories people can't stop talking about. As NASCAR grows through the 60s and 70s, Daytona becomes the sport's anchor. The teams that mattered showed up to Daytona ready to prove something. Because if you win at Daytona, it doesn't just go in the record book. It becomes a part of your identity for the rest of your career. And that's a big reason why drivers view Daytona differently than most races. At most tracks, a win is a win and points are points. But Daytona feels like winning the championship, but in February. And that's why the marketing phrase works, the Great American Race. It's not just branding, it's psychology. Daytona feels like the opening day in baseball, the Super Bowl, the Oscars, and a demolition derby all at the same time. You get celebrities, massive crowds, and the sport showing off like, hey, this is what we do. Even people who don't watch NASCAR know what Daytona is. Now you might be thinking, hold on, isn't the Indy 500 the greatest American race? And honestly, that's a fair argument. The Indy 500 has tradition. The milk, the pageantry, the history of champions, and the fact that it's been ran since 1911. The Indy 500 is old money. Daytona is new money, relatively speaking. But Daytona does something that the Indy 500 doesn't. Daytona became a national culture movement through television and mainstream entertainment. Indy is legendary, but Daytona is legendary and chaotic. Indy is measured precision, Daytona is controlled violence. That's why fans argue about which one is more important, but for NASCAR, there's no debate. Daytona is the holy grail. If there's one moment that truly created modern NASCAR fandom, it's the 1979 Daytona 500. This was the first Daytona 500 broadcast live, flag to flag, on national TV. And then nature basically handed NASCAR an audience. A snowstorm traps millions of people inside, especially in the Northeast. They turn on the TV, and there's the Daytona 500. Then the insane finish happens. Cale Yarborough and Donnie Allison battling. They wreck. And instead of walking away and saying see you next week, they get out and have a fist fight on live television. Then Bobby Allison joins in. It's insane, but it's real. And that fight was controversial, but it also made the NASCAR race unforgettable. People always say, but here's the truth. It was a moment America couldn't ignore. That broadcast didn't just make Daytona bigger, it made NASCAR a national sport. From that moment on, Daytona becomes a yearly machine that prints legends. Richard Petty didn't just win at Daytona, he owned Daytona. When the King won, it felt like an event itself. And this is important. Daytona gives drivers a myth. Richard Petty's myth was built here. In 1976, it may have been the most cinematic finish NASCAR has ever produced. Pearson and Petty wreck on the final lap. Pearson limps his car around, barely holding it together, and still manages to win. This is Daytona's magic. It doesn't just reward speed, it rewards survival. Now here's the emotional core of Daytona. Dale Earnhardt couldn't win it. Years of dominance everywhere else, but Daytona kept ripping it away. It became a running joke almost, but not necessarily funny. Then, 1998 happens. Earnhardt finally wins the Daytona 500, and Victory Lane turns into a rare moment where the whole sport agrees on something. This mattered. This win is the reason Daytona is a crown jewel. Daytona is also the birthplace of shock wins, because in plate and drafting racing, the field is close enough that small teams can steal it. That unpredictability makes people angry sometimes, but it also makes Daytona one of the most watchable races for casual fans. Modern Daytona has produced insane finishes, last lap slingshots, and 3 wide passes for the lead. Daytona turns into racing in a lottery with consequences. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the prestige debate. Some fans say Daytona doesn't feel like the crown jewel anymore because super speedway racing has turned into blocking, big wrecks, and survival, instead of driver skill, pure speed, and mastery of the track. And I kind of understand that opinion, because here's the truth. Daytona sometimes feels less like a chess match and more like a car crash waiting to happen. You'll see a great driver do everything right, lead the most laps, and still get collected in a wreck with 8 laps to go because someone made a desperate block. And that's been frustrating fans, and it frustrates the drivers too. You can hear it in interviews where they basically say, I did everything right, but it still doesn't matter. But at the same time, that chaos is part of Daytona's identity. So the question isn't, is Daytona worse? It's, is Daytona evolving into something different than what people want a crown jewel race to be? Let's talk about the ratings and attention. The Daytona 500 still brings in the biggest NASCAR TV numbers most years because it's the opener and a lot of casual fans check in compared to normal races. But the sport doesn't pull those mid-2000s peak ratings anymore. That doesn't mean Daytona is dead, but it means the media environment has changed. In 2006, everyone watched the same handful of channels. Now everyone is split across streaming, clips, TikTok, YouTube, and watching highlights elsewhere. So it's not just a NASCAR problem, it's a modern sports problem. But there's still legitimate concern. If you dilute the meaning of the season, if the playoffs feel gimmicky, and if the champion format feels random, that can bleed into how people view Daytona too. Because if the sport's big picture feels less serious, the prestige of the crown jewel is going to feel less serious too. Now in the future, we're just a couple days away from hearing the rumors that NASCAR may finally tweak the controversial playoff format. Changing how many drivers might be in it, changing the way points are done, possibly adjusting stages, and hopefully changing the finale. And if NASCAR announces big playoff changes, that could matter because it could change the weight of every race in the season. So here's my take. If NASCAR moves towards a format that feels more pure and points-based, Daytona is going to feel even more important as the historic anchor event. But if NASCAR decides to lean harder into the entertainment chaos of the playoffs, Daytona is going to stay the perfect symbol of modern NASCAR. Unpredictable, dramatic, loud, and attempting to be viral. Either way, Daytona is going to stay a crown jewel, but the prestige argument will depend on one thing. Does Daytona feel like a test of greatness, or does it feel like a test of survival? The Daytona 500 became the great American race because it's one of the few sporting events that consistently produce moments that feel bigger than sports. It's created legends, it's ended careers, and it changed safety forever. And it turned NASCAR into something America couldn't ignore. And even if the sport keeps changing, Daytona will always be the race that defines it. If you want to watch more motorsports history, short documentaries about NASCAR, F1, tragedies, and controversies, please consider subscribing to this channel. This sport has a lot of stories that deserve to be remembered.